Peggy McIntosh, or she's known by leftists, Saint Peggy of Our Sister of the I Hate White People Pan-African Revival, is single-handedly responsible for ushering in hatred of an entire race of people through an essay she wrote which would go on to become the Bible to Marxist leftists. White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. Born in the 1930s in an all-white, all-wealthy Brooklyn suburb, Peggy's life was that of unearned privilege. Having received an infinite galaxy brain degree in English, she held the right politics as a Frankfurt Marxist feminist and was allowed to teach feminist propaganda to an all-female school before being invited into Harvard, where she continued her education in English before becoming a research scientist based on those credentials. Yes, a research scientist whose highest educational achievement is a PhD in English focused on poetry. In 1988, St. Peggy drew on those all-white, all-wealthy experiences of the 1940s and 50s and penned an essay in which she projected that every single white person was exactly like her and every single black person needed whites to save them by unpacking their privileges. To this day, every single university, media network, or random rabid Marxist on the street corner that preaches white privilege preaches the holy canon verbatim without the slightest deviation from St. Peggy's 1943 upper-class frame of reference. Her essay gave people permission to hate whites for things that weren't even applicable in 1988, much less some 32 years later. But St. Peggy's word is infallible. This essay is the Marxist left's entire case against whites. It is the foundational bedrock on top of which march an entire army of white-hating bigots. So let's debunk this nonsense once and forever. So let's jump right in. 1. I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my own race most of the time. Damn it, man. White people being 99.99% of the population with like 17 sporadic blacks mixed in, it must be rough. It's not like blacks have literally thousands of neighborhoods, towns, and entire cities where they're the majority population and never ever have to even associate with a white person if they don't want. No, it's still 1940 in St. Peggy's mind, like all leftists, and nothing ever changes. Way to put your best foot forward and to be so incredibly wrong right out of the gate. 2. I can avoid spending time with people whom I was trained to mistrust and who have learned to mistrust my kind or me. We just covered this one. If blacks, Asians, Latinx, or natives want to spend time with one another and not around whites, then in their ghettos, Chinatown, barrios, or reservations, they can. If you're speaking about demanding a blacks-only segment of public Central Park, Jeanette Crow, take it easy.
Take it easy.
3. If I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area which I can afford and in which I want to live. This is where St. Peggy's projection starts to shine at peak brightness. Because she was a child of wealth, able to attend finishing schools, she attributes that to her being white, as attributing it to being female privilege would make her a bad feminist. But hating white people as a white person is just the ideal way to be white. Though with her frame of reference, never caring about anyone but herself and those poor minorities, I guess she doesn't realize that a region like where I live in the Appalachia is the poorest in the nation. As Kevin Williamson states here about the overwhelming white population that's suffering mightily from brutal generational poverty, they'd be put on reservations if they weren't white. That's how bad people have it in the hollers of the Appalachia. One of the biggest issues with leftists, especially self-entitled feminist leftists, is that they wish to project their own experiences onto the world, while insisting to everyone that their uninformed, biased opinions are reality. And we're all just mistaken. No, you privileged white child in Kentucky who hasn't ate in 2 days or bathed in 5. Your parents can actually take you anywhere in the nation to live without worry because they're white. Don't they have any Confederate bonds left over, you privileged bastard? 4. I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in such a location will be neutral or pleasant to me. Someone's never watched any crime shows on TV. Holy damn. There's living in a bubble, and then there's living in a microscopic droplet. How can someone held up as so intelligent be so incredibly blind to the world, yet still end up believing herself wise and the savior of all colored kind? Plus, black people, when Peggy allows them to speak for themselves, seem to disagree, as they constantly remind us that white-on-white crime, often committed by those kindly neighbors, accounts for 84% of white murders. But in Peggy's neighborhood, all the rich white elders drank champagne together and laughed in capitalism. And that's obviously how all whites live, because that's how she lived. And she's more importanter than you. 5. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. Not when you look like white trash, you can't. In the hollers, there's no Kmart. Need to shop at Kmart? You got to go into the valley, where the middle class live. Even with your parents, you're followed around and whispered about and treated like mountain trash that doesn't belong there. You didn't grow up in the real world, St. Peggy. You grew up on an elitist estate. All the bourgeoisie think that they're the proletariat. It's a unifying principle of communism. LARP as to every man to trick them into accepting your superior position. 6. I can turn on the television or open up to the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented. Look, if you didn't have a TV in 1988, why include this? My guess, they allowed a woman with an English degree to become a research scientist and teach impressionable young women, so no need to check your privilege as a wealthy white female when not doing so has worked out so well this long. Look at this long-ass list of black-specific TV shows, most of which did not feature any whites outside of the role of bad guy. Dynamite! Raj and Rerun. It puts the roofie in the pudding pop. I can't do a Bill Cosby. Did I do that? In West Philadelphia, born Sinbad and Dwayne Wayne, Martin, damn Gina, you big dummy, dun dun dun, Miss Nell, Mama, Weezy, Jackie, in living color, Rock Baby, what you talking about, Willis? Mo to the E to the Sherman Hemsley again, Webster, a rerun of Rerun, Benson Du Bois, I'm French, shibbity bibbity dibbity doobity higgity hanging with Mr. Cooper. Welcome to Good Burger, home of the Good Burger. That's just the top 50 shows, all black, at least a dozen of which were already hit shows on the air before 1988, available on just basic cable. And as a white boy, as you can probably tell from me knowing so much about them, I watched most of them. I think the only white quote-unquote show I can remember watching is Alf, and that's a damn alien. Blossom sucked. Leftist owned by reality part infinity. 7. When I am told about our national heritage or about civilization, I am shown that people of my color made it what it is. Well, for serious, Western society is European society, which was built by, wait for it, Europeans. I wonder in the Congo, in Nigeria, and Liberia if they're teaching about how awesome those damn Mayans were, or if they're teaching children of their culture their own history or someone else's. This isn't a privilege necessarily, it's a consequence of daring to teach accurate materials. You would have it how the BBC does it. Achilles and Henry VIII and Shakespeare were all black. So you would lie to everyone to be inclusive to some, instead of just actually telling the truth. 8. I can be sure that my children will be given curricular materials that testify to the existence of their race. Black History Week was started way back in the 1920s, before you were even born, Grand Boomer. Black History Month became mandatory nationwide before you wrote this pack of lies, which people still oddly worship in order to justify their hatred. 9. If I want to, I can be pretty sure of finding a publisher for this piece on white privilege. I'm white. I couldn't find a publisher for mine. I couldn't say a version of the N-word in the last example because YouTube would delete my channel. Trust me, I know. People with your politics can be published because universities and media are terribly skewed left. You know it's a bold, egotistical person to tell a lie this easily spotted, yet still sticks with it 32 years later. I couldn't find a publisher to rebut this outside of the Daily Stormer. This is a blatant lie. 10. I can be pretty sure of having my voice heard in a group in which I am the only member of my race. Not entirely sure what this one means. Some POC kid in the room full of whites and nobody listens to them. Yeah, it's not as if POC kids are allowed to take entire universities hostage and get people fired and get their demands met for easier courses. No. Minorities simply aren't heard, at least in Peggy's rich neighborhood of the 1940s where those dirty blacks were kept out, unless they were doing yard work for her affluent parents. Stop projecting, or at least stop pretending you're an intellectual. You just can't have it both ways. 11. I can be casual about whether or not to listen to another person's voice in a group in which he is the only member of her race. Everyone can. Everyone. Casual is just an adjective that you can act out sort of as a verb in a way. Some people act casually when they're on trial for murder, while others scream bloody murder and look for a safe space when they see a red hat from 2 blocks away. How we act in certain situations being dictated by privilege is the conclusion of a mediocre intellect attempting to sound intelligent in a postmodern field. 12. I can go into a music shop and count on finding the music of my race represented, into a supermarket and find the staple foods which fit with my cultural traditions, into a hairdresser shop and find someone who can cut my hair. Right. Here's what I found in Tape World when I was a kid. Cool Mode D, The Wild Wild West. Gangstar, De La Soul, it's just me, myself, and I. Public Enemy, Flavor Flav, Ghetto Boys, Dr. Dre, Big Daddy Kane, all on the display racks as soon as you walk in. You know, buy me, buy me, buy me. Not the bargain bin, but the $13.99 for a cassette tape that you're going to listen to in your Sony Walkman. But Marv, that was the early 90s, you say. Okay, fair enough. When Peggy was in her 30s, 20 years before writing her essay in the 1960s, here's what was sweeping the entire planet by storm. Rhythm and blues. Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, Smokey Robinson, Michael Jackson, Diana Ross, The Temptations, The Shy-Lights, Otis Redding, Al Green, and on it goes. Odd that this genre sold hundreds of millions of LPs in the 60s, yet were never featured in stores. Not sure what sort of networking they had, but damn. Doubtful Peggy could find them in the Hampton store, however, next to the $240 lobster salad. Maybe they had some Frank Sinatra. As to the food, this is also nonsense. For starters, we all know what some folks eat. Good. Come on. That's readily available in all the stores, what they eat. Asians also have, I can't even talk now. Asians have also had a ton of Asian markets dating back to the late 1800s in railroad towns and in different encampments, especially after the Civil War. So maybe they didn't install enchilada aisles yet. At the time of Peggy's youth, Hispanics were fewer than 4% of the nation. At the time of her essay, they were right around 7%. Though if every store didn't sell smoked chipotles and adobe sauce, it was white privilege. Well, what about the black and Asian privilege too, since they found food they liked just fine? Now, you'll stick with white, as that makes people hate us more. As for cutting your hair, if you're trying to say some people have hair that scissors can't cut, you need to unpack and deternalize your internalized racism. You're just a horrible person. 13. Whether I use checks, credit cards, or cash, I can count on my skin color not to work against the appearance of financial reliability. I'm not saying you're somehow bad for not being born and raised dirt-ass poor in the mountains, treated like trash, forced to wear homemade clothing and shoes taped together. Good for you for having wealthy elitist parents who could send you to a finishing school where you would go on to get an English degree and become a research scientist. Good for you. Some of us didn't have that privilege, and we were treated our entire lives like we would steal something before buying something. Even handing money over, there was a tension felt, as if someone suspected you had stolen it. We were all white, you sheltered, self-centered egomaniac. But I know I can hear some criticism now. Well, that's because you were just, extra. Black people can't change being black, but you could have went and put on better clothes and actually made money and got out of that. Is that really the point here that we're making? That the oppression Olympics are real? That world ends, black people most affected? Not that everyone should change their preconceived notions, just that everyone has to change for society so society stops picking on them, except for the poor minorities who we assume, I guess, are too stupid and inept to actually change to assimilate into a culture. Is that really where we would go with that? I really hope not. 14. I can arrange to protect my children most of the time from people who might not like them. I expect this to be a dig at the mythical white on black violence that was overhyped in the 1960s and still continues to be overhyped today. Look, it's odd that we have to provide a research scientist with actual hard data here. You had one job, A man would be fired if he did this bad a job. As we see, around double the amount of whites are killed by police than blacks, although blacks have far more interactions with police, which means they're in more of a position to be shot by these supposedly bigoted cops. After all, you cannot wreck your car unless you're in your car. Also, objective data that you missed as a research scientist shows 93% of blacks are killed by other blacks. So apparently those people who hate blacks are other blacks. The people who might not like them are apparently their kin. Though that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about black parents having to tell their children to act differently around white people because you're so old that you pushed your first baby down the river in a basket and project the world doesn't change around you because you're too special for that. 15. I do not have to educate my children to be aware of systemic racism for their own daily physical protection. Just refer above. It's not that awful systemic racism harming those children. It's their own people. And it's people like St. Peggy who convinced these mothers to blame a scapegoat boogeyman instead of understanding the real dangers. So when their child is harmed or killed, that child was never prepared for reality because he or she was being taught about the dangerous dogma from this false idol. 16. I can be pretty sure that my children's teachers and employers will tolerate them if they fit school and workplace norms. My chief worries about them do not concern others' attitudes toward their race. Doesn't everyone have to fit norms? Michael Vick was allowed back into the NFL after dogfighting. Black. Johnny Manziel was permanently thrown out for being a sport party boy who talked back. White. If you act right, act normal, you'll be okay. If you don't want to be treated like a problem, then don't rage out on people every time you see them or they get under your skin a little bit. We don't have different expectations on black as broader society. You do in your progressive cult. You're the ones who think they can't change and are only going to act how they act, that tiger is always going to go tiger. You expect that they'll act like this, yet we should embrace it as part of our penance for being white. We expect them not to act like this and to assimilate into normative culture, yet it's our problem, and you say it's a privilege that we're somehow forcing others to act normal. 17. I can talk with my mouth full and not have people put this down to my color. I'm not sure about this. I guess it's one of those myths we hear about but never see, like Bigfoot, El Chupacabra, and white people wanting to touch black people's hair. We constantly hear about it. We've just never witnessed an actual example of it. I'll take, the Daily Double. 18. I can swear or dress in secondhand clothes or not answer letters without having people attribute these choices to the bad morals, the poverty, or the illiteracy of my race. Again, wrong. You do that where I'm from, or just live as poor in general, the most common 3 words you hear from everyone outside that life is poor, white, trash. What's that second word there? I can speak in public to a powerful male group without putting my race on trial. What even does this mean? Male group? Cognitive dissonance has to be tough to live with. Be Peggy. Get promoted without earning it from cradle to grave. For being a woman of wealth who capitulates just enough to be useful. Though insist that she doesn't have female privilege, just white privilege, and that males are the ones who really have more privilege because they have gender privilege, while not a one of them has ever been gifted the position of a research scientist by having a degree in English. The only time feminists actually show any creativity is when they're sneaking in their patriarchy talking points in totally unrelated context. 20. I can do well in a challenging situation without being called a credit to my race. St. Peggy's essay's original working title, Things That Happened in 1945. This is another thing that we hear about happening, yet never ever seen a single example of since TV stopped being black and white. 21. I am never asked to speak for all people of my racial group. If the conversation is about race, which your ilk insists that we have constantly, we're told that black people need to stop talking about race with us because we're not qualified to have opinions on race as white people. But hold up. That's only 1 2. The other 2 is in Peggy chastising us for allowing black people to speak up on racial issues concerning them. Completing the catch-22, we're damned if we do, damned if we... nonsensical elitist gibberish. 22. I can remain oblivious to the language and customs of persons of color who constitute the world's majority without feeling in my culture any penalty for such oblivion. Wow. This one legit scares me. If you want to know how communists could have killed 160 million people yet still claim that they're the ideology of peace, here's why. Here's a psychotic elitist woman who already thinks she's better than you in every measurable way. Now she thinks you should be punished if you're white in Mississippi and don't learn about the subcontinental culture of the Bangladeshi. It's also, if you pay attention, it's also an incredibly racist assumption on her part. And that the black person in Mississippi would know all about the Bangladeshi culture because they're both colored people, and therefore the scary part is the without consequence stuff. Without any punishments. There's no penalty. That's the scary part. What should happen to me if I don't know about the culture of the Papua New Guineans because my life is spent trying to feed my family and pay my bills and keep myself sheltered? I didn't sacrifice my children's well-being so I could learn all about the awesomeness of the Filipino Islands and their rich history. Uh-oh. It's not that I'm busy actually having a life to live rather than having one handed to me like Little Miss Projection Machine had hers handed to her. It's that I just hate these people. A firing squad, maybe? I forfeited my right to live? Maybe 6 gorillion in one. You're not only a very mediocre intellect projecting your elitist spoiled life onto other people who've never had the opportunity to have a fraction of what you have, but now you want people punished for not devoting time in their lives to learning about cultures that are absolutely meaningless to us in every possible way. 23. I can criticize our government and talk about how much I fear its policies and behavior without being seen as a cultural outsider. Tell that to the Tea Party, who were considered the rebirth of the KKK and just had to be counterculture racist for having the audacity to not agree with the policies of a black man. 24. I can be pretty sure that if I talk to the person in charge, I will be facing a person of my own race. Depends on where you're at. Are you trying to say that blacks can't be bosses, or Latinx, or Asians? You mean to tell me all those thousands of majority black locations we looked at earlier, and every single business there is run by Karen and Becky? Though I suppose Daddy wouldn't have taken you into a store run by one of those coloreds at the risk of you talking to him. Stop projecting.